The sky burned red above the city that had stood for 1,000 years. Church bells screamed over the sound of cannon thunder, and amid the chaos, a young mother clutched her child, whispering prayers to a god who seemed to have left the world. This was the last night of Constantinople. The earth shook with each blast of Mem's great bombard. Dust fell from the ceiling of homes, and walls cracked like old bones. The people inside whispered the same name, Ottoman. They were not soldiers. These people, tailors, bakers, monks, widows, and now they waited for the end. Alina, barely 20, pressed her infant to her chest. Her husband had been taken to the walls 3 days earlier and had not returned. Outside, the once glorious city smelled of smoke and blood. From the broken towers, flames reached into heaven like pleading hands. At dawn, the gates broke. The roar of the army was not human. It was the sound of history swallowing a civilization whole. Through the alleys came armored men, thousands of them, faces hidden behind steel. Banners of the crescent rising through the firelight. Behind them, the city's screams began. Alina ran through the church square where icons lay shattered on the ground, through the market where the dead lay unburied. She ran. Around her, people were pulled apart, families torn from each other, voices begging in Greek and Latin and silence. She reached the Hagia Sophia, that sacred heart of the city. Inside, thousands had gathered, believing sanctuary could stop the world. But as the bronze doors burst open, they realized there were no safe walls anymore. The conquerors entered not as men, but as a storm. What followed was not battle, it was the unraveling of an empire's soul. Gold, relics, books, everything the Romans had built, taken, burned, scattered. Alina saw one of the great mosaics, the Virgin and Child, crushed beneath a soldier's boot, and in that instant, something inside her broke too. Outside, the city that once ruled half the world became silent except for the weeping. As the smoke cleared, the sound of marching filled the streets again, slower, organized, endless. The Ottoman banners rose over the broken domes, and among the ashes of the empire, a voice whispered, "This is only the beginning." Dawn rose over a dead city. Smoke drifted from the domes like breath from a dying giant. The roar of war was gone, replaced by the clink of chains and the murmurs of prayers. Constantinople had fallen, but its agony had just begun. The streets were filled with dust and footsteps. Men in armor moved like shadows, counting the living, dragging the wounded, searching for those who still hid among the ruins. Behind them came scribes and officers, writing lists, names of the captured, amounts of gold, the worth of a life in numbers. Alina stood among the survivors near the great harbor, her child silent against her chest. Around her, lines of prisoners stretched to the horizon, monks, nobles, farmers, even children clutching bits of broken icons. The conqueror's language filled the air, harsh, rhythmic, commanding. She did not understand the words, but she understood what they meant: ownership. From the palace hill, the young Sultan Memde watched in silence. He was only 21, but his eyes carried the calm of centuries. Behind him, his generals spoke of glory, destiny, empire. He listened, unmoved. Then he whispered a single order: restore the city. But what was left to restore? The streets were rivers of ash. Churches became barracks. Homes turned into cages. Everywhere, the sound of hammers echoed, rebuilding and repurposing at once. The same hands that once prayed now worked under watchful eyes. In the markets, auctions began. Names were replaced with numbers. Alina stood among others as buyers passed: merchants from Anatolia, officers from the army, foreign envoys. Each looked with the same expression: calculation. When a soldier reached for her child, she clung tighter, but her strength was nothing against the world's new order. A shadow fell over her, an older man with a scholar's face and a soldier's eyes. He spoke to her in broken Greek: "Do not resist. Live, and your child may live too." He turned and left. She never knew his name, but his words became her chain, not of iron, but of fear. That night, the moon hung over the ruined city. Fires burned in the palaces where laughter once echoed, and in the harbor, ships waited, filled with prisoners, treasures, and a silence that would sail across empires. On the third night, as the last bells of the Hagia Sophia fell silent, Alina was led toward the ships. She looked back once at the city that had raised her, baptized her, and buried her. Then she stepped into the darkness of the sea, not knowing where it would take her, only that it would never bring her home again. The sea was black and endless. Waves slapped against the wooden hull like the heartbeat of a dying world. Somewhere behind them, Constantinople burned beneath a new flag, and ahead only silence and the unknown. Alina sat among dozens of others in the dark belly of the ship. The smell of salt, sweat, and despair filled the air. Her baby slept against her shoulder, too exhausted to cry. Every few hours, the guards above shouted orders, harsh, foreign words carried by the wind. No one knew where they were being taken. The ship belonged to an Ottoman officer named Halal Pasha, a man known for both cruelty and discipline. He walked the deck with measured steps, staring out at the sea as if it were his property. Below, his captives huddled together, whispering in languages that no longer mattered. At sunset, the door above opened, and blinding light poured in. Names were called, some in Turkish, some in broken Greek. Those chosen were brought above deck, never to return. Alina listened, heart pounding, as each name echoed like a death toll. When the door closed again, silence followed, heavy and eternal. Days blurred into each other. Storms came and went. Some prayed, some cursed, and some simply stared into nothing. For the first time in her life, Alina began to understand what it meant to lose not just a home but a name, a history, a place in the world. One night, when the sea was calm and the moon shone bright as silver, a young soldier opened the hatch quietly. He looked down, holding a piece of bread and a flask of water. "Take this," he whispered in Greek. "Hide it." Alina took it, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why help me?" she asked. He looked away. "Because tomorrow, I might need someone to remember my name that night." As she fed her child in the shadows, she realized something. Kindness and cruelty often wore the same face. The empires of men were built not just on power, but on moments like this, fragile, uncertain, human. The next morning, the ship reached land, a port surrounded by hills, with banners fluttering in the wind. The captives were led off the ships, blindfolded, chained, and counted once more. Alina heard the sound of prayers, not in her language, but in the conquerors. It was the sound of victory, and as she stepped onto foreign soil, she understood. She was no longer a citizen of a fallen empire. She was part of its spoils. A soldier whispered to another, "Those marked with white paint go to the palace, the rest to the markets." Alina looked down. On her sleeve, a smear of white glowed under the sun. She clutched her child tighter as the gates ahead opened, swallowing her into a new world. The palace was not built for mercy. It glittered in the sun like a blade, and within its marble walls, silence was the first law. Alina entered it barefoot, her child clutched close, stepping from one world into another. The gates closed behind them with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Inside, the air smelled of roses, oil, and iron. Every wall gleamed white and gold. Every corridor whispered of discipline. The Sultan's palace was not just a home, it was a machine, built to turn human lives into obedience. Alina was led through courtyards where fountains spilled over carved lions, past rows of servants who never spoke, and into a chamber of women dressed in silks. They moved with slow grace, eyes lowered, faces unreadable. One of them, older and sharp-eyed, stepped forward and studied her. "New?" she asked in Turkish. A guard nodded. The woman turned back. "She learns fast, or she disappears." Days turned into weeks. Alina learned to wash marble floors until her hands bled, to bow before every officer who passed, to speak only when spoken to. Her child was taken to the nursery, cared for by others, seen only from a distance. At night, she lay awake, hearing music from distant halls, soft, haunting melodies that spoke of lands she would never see. She watched the palace live like a creature, every wing with its own purpose, every voice part of a song she didn't understand. There was cruelty here, yes, but it was quiet, refined, wrapped in gold. A punishment could come as softly as a smile. A life could end with no sound at all. One afternoon, while cleaning the mosaics of the inner court, she saw him. Sultan Mehmed himself, passing with his advisors. He was young, proud, wearing armor that shone like fire. Their eyes met for a single heartbeat, and in that moment, she saw not a conqueror, but a boy who had inherited too much darkness too soon. He looked away, and the moment vanished like smoke. That night, a storm swept over the city. Thunder rolled across the Bosporus, shaking even the marble towers. Alina stood by the window of her small chamber, watching lightning flash over the sea. For a moment, she imagined the walls breaking, the water rushing in, washing everything clean. At dawn, the chief attendant entered her room with a sealed order. "You are to be presented," the woman said. "To whom?" Alina whispered. The answer came cold and simple: to destiny and the will of the empire. The palace bells rang at dawn. Somewhere deep inside its walls, a door opened and a life changed forever. Alina stood in the corridor trembling, her heart a storm of fear and fire. Outside, the empire rejoiced. Inside, she prepared to meet her fate. She was led through endless marble corridors by the woman they called the Keeper of Secrets. Each step echoed through the halls like a drumbeat. The scent of incense and oil filled the air. Guards lined a passage, unmoving, unreadable. At the end of the hall, golden doors waited. When they opened, light poured in, soft, golden, endless. Inside sat Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, beneath a great dome painted with stars. He was no longer the boy she had seen in the courtyard. He was a ruler now, calm, distant, the weight of empire in his gaze. He spoke softly, not as a tyrant, but as one who carried too many ghosts. "You were from the city," he said. Alina nodded. "Then you have seen what empires do," he continued. "They build, they destroy, and they forget." He stood, walked toward her, and looked at the child now sleeping in her arms. "He will grow in this palace," the Sultan said. "He will never know hunger or chains. But he will not know you either. Do you understand? Her lips trembled. She nodded. She did not cry. There were no tears left. That day, Alina became a whisper within the palace, one of many stories the empire buried beneath its marble and gold. She worked, she obeyed, she endured. And though her son was raised as a page of the court, learning to speak the conqueror's tongue, she watched from afar, her heart split between pride and pain. Years passed. The empire grew, new lands, new victories, new cities conquered in the name of destiny. But in the quiet corners of the palace, some still spoke of the woman from Constantinople who once met the Sultan's eyes and did not bow. They said she reminded him that every crown was built on bones, and that every empire carried the ghosts of those it crushed. One evening, many years later, Mehmed walked the halls alone. He paused before a mosaic one restored from the ruins of the Hagia Sophia. It showed a mother holding her child. For a moment, he closed his eyes. In the silence, he could almost hear the distant tolling of the bells of the lost city and the voice of the woman who had once stood before him outside. The empire glittered like gold under the sunset, but within its walls, the whispers of the conquered still echoed, soft, endless, and eternal. Empires rise, empires fall, but the cries of the forgotten never fade.